Welcome to Diplomatic Ties. Intra-Africa migration provides significant economic benefits. And this is because migrants are estimated to contribute between 9 to 19% to national GDPs in host countries like South Africa, Rwanda and Cote d'Ivoire, and they spend roughly 85% of their incomes in their host country. Despite the economic benefits, anti-migrant sentiment is rising and often driven by high unemployment, poverty and political scapegoating. Report in May 2026 indicates rising xenophobic attacks in South Africa against other African nationals, prompting diplomatic intervention from countries like Ghana and Nigeria. And these tensions have also threatened to scuttle the AU's efforts at regional integration, such as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, by treating border controls as tools of exclusion rather than facilitating movements. In this episode of Diplomatic Ties, we are going to discuss economic ties and anti-immigrant sentiments, looking at policy responses from AU, IOM and other regional organizations with Dr. Hosea Olaiwola Patrick. Our guest is a research fellow at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, and a postdoctoral fellow at McMaster University. He is a transdisciplinary scholar with research focused on environmental politics and justice, governance, policy and security studies. Dr. Hosea, we are delighted to have you in our studio.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here too.
And I am Comfort Fashion. But before we go into the main focus of our discussion, let's take a break. Welcome back. The program is Diplomatic Ties and we are looking at economic ties and anti-immigrant sentiment as well as the policies being undertaken by the African Union and other regional organizations with Dr. Hosea. Dr. Hosea, let us start with the experience and situated realities of xenophobic violence. You were in South Africa during the xenophobic attack. Could you reflect on the everyday experience and realities that is usually or often obscured from media attention?
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's important that in the conversation around xenophobia, especially in South Africa, context is given, and there's a need to provide historical context as relating to what this is. Yes, we are all aware of the fact that this is negative sentiment that South Africans, or better still, host communities have against other fellow Africans. Because yes, there are other foreign nationals in South Africa that this does not apply to. And the reason being that understanding that South Africa post-apartheid was just 1994, so we're talking about plus minus 32 years ago. So there's the concept of historical violence that these people have experienced over time, and the fact that with this historical violence, there were expectations post-1994, or better say pre-1994, there were expectations that the people expected they were supposed to have. Okay, we're going to get independence, things will change. We now have a government of our own, things are supposed to change. And then that happened and other African nationals showed up to the plate. So these are people, and you must also understand that other African nationals are coming from historical advantage, in the sense that you have people that quote and unquote are not educated because of the system that have made them uneducated over a while. And then they are coming to compete with other fellow Africans, quote and unquote, that are educated, more exposed and all that. So, and then there's a competition for the little resources that, quote and unquote, is available within the community. So that breeds in itself, first and foremost, is the frustration that things has not transformed as it should be, right? The expectation from these people. And then while it is not transforming, they are seeing that other Africans, quote and unquote, are thriving within the community where they are not, right? And so what happened in this space is the subtle aggression that is now melted on the people they can actually assess, because now they can assess government, right? There's no water. There is probably the issue of water. We have what we refer to as load shedding now. That is now rampant in South Africa and the likes. At the time I go to South Africa, the electrical system, for instance, was perfect, right? But now you have all these resources are dwindling down. So this frustration in itself is meted on the people they can really see, which are supposed. So since they can't put it on government, they put it on the fellow people. And I suppose we'll have this conversation in the course of this, but I can preempt you to say there has been negative propaganda, misinformation, right? And they assume that their problem basically is because of the fellow Africans that have come to compete on these resources with them, right? Okay, so this person is not educated. Probably the best job he can do is maybe as a help, a domestic worker. And you have somebody else from another neighboring country that probably can do the domestic work, or the domestic work even better and take lesser salary. What do you expect from? So this breeds this supposed continuous hatred of Africans and of other African nationals within this space. And one way or the other, we seems to be, I'm trying to mind my word, but we seem to be loud, right? And loud in the sense that we are assertive as Nigerians, right? And yes, other countries, other Africa, and that's why anywhere, not just in South Africa alone, in Ghana, in Togo, anywhere in Africa, there's a focus on Nigerians because we are generally assertive people. We know what we want and we go for it, right? And then you have people that have been told to keep quiet over time. They've been subtle over time. You get that? So that is the situation which is pronounced in South Africa, but also in other parts of Africa.
All right, during the violence, the xenophobic violence, can you tell us to what extent did locals or exhibit heterogeneous responses to migrants living in South Africa? Were there any form of covert or informal form of protection offered by the locals to the migrants?
Oh yeah, there's so to put it right, it is not the entirety of South Africa that is, or South Africans as it stands, that have these xenophobic tendencies, right? Because of the soft diplomacy in which we have as Nigerians, right? Soft diplomacy of our Nollywood, our film industry, right? And then soft diplomacy in the sense of also spirituality. Because there's spiritual exploitation that we do. That's a different gist in itself, right? There is a respect everywhere in the world, basically, and in Africa, that's a respect and reverence that people have for Nigerians. You get that? So yes, there are. It's just a little. Let's if we are going to put it statistically, probably maybe less than 2% of people that are actually violent, right, and exhibit this violence. You know, when it comes to mob organization, you can only start a mob, but you cannot control the mob, right? When these things go off grants and all that. And you must also know that there's this saying we say that places or people that have historical violence, that have experienced violence, have the propensity for violence. It comes easy for them to be violent. You get that? For people that have experienced these things over time, right? So yeah, there are people there that naturally their first instinct will be to protect the foreigners when these things transpire, right? Not every day that it happens, but when it happens, obviously there are a lot of people that provide shelter, right? And that will even put their life in the line to protect other foreign nationals.
So tell us, how did the government and the other institutions responded? Did they act swiftly before the whole thing caught the attention of media organizations?
Oh no. Not just in South Africa alone. I'm going to contextualize this in South Africa, but I'll tell you generally in Africa as a whole, our governments are reactionary instead of being proactionary, right? We wait for issues to happen, even though we know these issues are there. We wait until it becomes like probably sometimes maybe international media organization picks it up. That's when we take cognizance of it. And you must also know that apart from the regular xenophobic tendency that we get to see that becomes violent, there's also systemic xenophobic tendency that is also transpiring, that is becoming an everyday reality in South Africa. So yes, this may not be a popular saying, but there is still a level of government responsibility in these things, in these uproars that happen, because politicians tend to take advantage of the fact that people are frustrated. For instance, in the last election, there were insinuations to the fact that the reason why resources typical South Africans are not enjoying the resources they are supposed to enjoy was as a result of quote and unquote foreigners, right? There are statistical facts to this, I should say, that sometimes this is the reality. For instance, when you go to the shack settlements there, that's like the slums, right? You have settlements close to cities whereby they are just built with zincs, right, and wood and all that, and then people are packed up there in the likes. I was listening to a news some couple of days, and they were talking about some of these settlements in Joburg, for instance, whereby these were supposed to be for economic migrants to bigger cities that cannot afford housing, right? But you realize that in some of these places you have more foreigners, right, in those places, and you have lesser indigenous nationals, South African nationals in these places, right? So when this violence erupts, the first set of people that will face the impacts of this violence will be these people that are situated in these slums, right? And it's in those slums. So when you hear that, okay, there's a destruction of shops that are for foreign nationals and the likes, it starts from these places. So, yeah, government it's the government's. I would say 60% or 70% of the blame, quote and unquote, will be on government. And like I said, they are reactionary, right? And we've experienced different violent situations in South Africa whereby even at the point of the protests and the likes, you see that government are quiet, they are silent. I'll give you a case in point, Operation Dudula, right? Okay. Operation Dudula and several other organizations like that are in the same courts with Operation Dudula started because government is saying nothing, right? These are people that are not governmental organizations. They don't have legitimacy anywhere, right? But they, quote and unquote, are doing they took it upon themselves to do the work of the immigration, right? So they started with the fact that, what we are doing is that we are only checking for undocumented migrants, because yes, there's a case of there's the situation of undocumented migrants increasing in South Africa, right? So they said, okay, they are taking it upon themselves as individuals to check up undocumented migrants, and then it moved from that to from undocumented migrants to even the ones that are documented, to the point whereby we have situation whereby they start disallowing foreign nationals to use public facilities like hospitals and the likes. They stop foreign nationals from using it. But the question is that you have police, even when these things are happening, you have police that are 2 minutes or 3 minutes drive away from. Police stations are everywhere in South Africa. You get that? So, but the police will not intervene. Government is not saying anything about it, because if they come out and are assertive, right, like the case of Julius Malema, right, I'm still assertive and say, okay, we are not doing this. This is what it should be, and this is what we are doing. they can curtail these people. But over time, they gave these people wings, right? And it's, like I said, you can only start a war, right? Or create a mob or start a monster. But you, at a point, it becomes difficult for you to control how these things will operate. So yeah.
So what do you say? What does this reveal about the state's capacity, the political will, and let's say the prioritization of migrants' protection now?
So the issue with South Africa and the entirety of Africa, yes, we always say that the people get the leaders they deserve. You get that? But yes, so yes, we have followership issue, but the core of our problem is leadership issue. There is practically the lack of political will to consciously curtail these things. Because, like I said, sometimes these are political agendas, right? Because during elections, it has been insinuated that the government that has refused to provide amenities, right, will align it and say the reason why people are not enjoying the amenities as they should is because other foreign nationals are swamping the resources that is available, right? In as much as there's an iota of truth in the fact that there are other nationals in the system, right? And this resource is being shared by other nationals, but yes, there's still the leadership dilemma, the leadership issue, basically, that is leading to this and is fueling it. You get that? So yeah, that's the challenge in South Africa.
All right, so let's go to let's talk about diplomatic ties and economic interconnectedness. How do you think these episodes of xenophobic violence shape diplomatic relations between African states? How does it shape trade flows and how does it shape regional integration? What are their implications?
That's an interesting question. So first and foremost, the first culprits to xenophobic tendencies, especially when government are not governments within these spaces are not taking the bull by the horn, is that it creates mistrust among other nationals, among other nation states, basically, right? When we come to Africa, we continuously speak on the need for one Africa, borderless Africa. We need to do things together. We should not relate with the West more than we relate with ourselves, and the many things we'll say and all that. What this creates is mistrust, you get, and then you start talking about the policy of tit for tat, right? You definitely have heard around, even in Nigeria among Nigerian politicians, for instance, talking about the fact that South African investments in Nigeria should be targeted, right? Quote and unquote, right? And then because Nigerians are targeted there, right? And that in itself, again, is a different conversation in itself, because again, we ask ourselves, what is the Nigerian investment in South Africa that can be targeted outside our spiritual exportations that we do to South Africa? You see the government of Botswana, for instance, talking, right? And also bringing up demands on the South African government, trying to put pressure on the South African government. You see Namibia doing the same thing. These are SADC countries. Yeah. You get that? Doing the same thing. And so the mistrust it creates affects every other thing. Because for us to engage in trade, for us to grow together, quote and unquote, there has to be some level of brotherliness, right? Some level of comradeship that we must carry as Africans. Because at the end of the day, the argument has always been that it is economically, it's cheaper, right? Partnering with the West than partnering with Benin Republic. You get that? Our African. So it takes consciousness by Africans to relate with fellow Africans. You get that? And when you now have this xenophobic tendency continuously increasing in different states in Africa. South Africa championing, quote and unquote, championing this negative tendency. It becomes a challenge for every aspect of our governance, right? The economic space, the political space, it becomes a serious challenge.
All right, stay with us on the program while we take a break. We'll be back shortly. If you're just joining us, the program is Diplomatic Ties, and we have with us in the studio Dr. Hosea Olaiwola Patrick to shed spotlight on policies of AU and other regional bodies on economic ties and anti-immigrant sentiments. Dr. Hosea, from economic perspective, do you think violence and exclusionary measures against foreign workers can meaningfully protect the domestic employment? Just like you said, they believe that foreigners were coming to their country to take away their jobs and like that. Or do you think the case is the vice versa?
Oh yeah, the case is definitely vice versa. So what you get is, like I said, the misinformation and the propaganda that foreigners are actually the problem. But what we have as the actual problem is a leadership crisis, right? And a case of expectations not meeting reality, right? Like I said, 32 years ago, thereabout 1994, they just came out of apartheid, right? There are expectations, right? And that has not been met. And yes, regardless of taking foreigners, quote and unquote, outside South Africa, it's not going to bring the job, because the job is not there in the first place. That is why the propaganda is there that you are not getting the job because the foreigners are here. You get that? So even if you take them off, the job is still not going to be there, right? And the popular one now is the June 30 deadline, right? Yeah. So let's just even hypothetically, which is not possible first, right? But let's just hypothetically even agree that June 30th all foreigners leave, right? The reality will now be, that's when you now get the reality that it has never been the foreigners in the first place that were taking this job. And then the negative effect of that is the fact that if you say all foreigners leave, the implication is that you're also saying that the expatriates, right, people within our own category that are actively contributing into the system also need to leave. Then who covers those spaces, right? If you go to these hospitals, quote and unquote, the same hospital that they are not allowing foreigners to come in, Nigerian doctors are there. So when you tell that doctor, which is a foreign national, maybe from Zimbabwe, or from Namibia, or from wherever African country that the person is coming, to leave on June 30th, and is scheduled for surgery and the many things that you have to do medically, post June 30, who will do it? Will you have enough South African doctors post June 30? You get that? So the negative impact of that is higher than the pros. In fact, technically there's no pros to it, right? So that's from just a generalist space when you look at it.
So what do you think about June 30th? Is it reality or just...
So it goes back to what I said initially when I said these are just individuals without legitimate powers, just forming a group, and have been emboldened by the silence of government over time, right? And they've, quote and unquote, become a monster in themselves and feel that now they have the power to direct or not direct, right? I was listening to a clip where the person was saying that don't listen to the government, right? Which implies that they also are aware that they don't have the legitimate power to do this. You cannot just wake up and say people should leave. There are human rights implications to that, international human rights implications to this. The government is a signatory to this. You get that? So there are economic implications to this, like I said, the government will crumble if foreigners leave. You get that? So there's economic implication, there's legal implication, there's also political implication, and security implication also when you say there's mass exodus of people from South Africa to other parts of the world. There's also security implication of that. Because what we have is that in the countries they are going to now, they will now start having, it may not be xenophobia again, it may probably call it something else. You get that? Imagine if the exodus of Nigerians in South Africa push back to Nigeria, or they move to another neighboring state and the likes. We have the same issue. It's a resource issue. You get that? And just to say for the record that most problem in Africa is masqueraded as political, religious, and the likes, but it is an economic.
All right. Let's look at this. In your view, how can this rhetoric of one Africa, I mean the pan-African unity, be reconciled with this experience of migrants experiencing violence, insecurity within the continent?
Oh yeah, it's going to be the concept of winning hearts and minds. There has to be conscious, and that's what IMO is doing, right? There are policies by IMO that talks about community liaising, right? And consciously consciously ensuring that the narrative from the media is changed, right? So the whole ideas around winning hearts and minds, there has to be a consciousness to make people understand that Africa is one, right? And we are not supposed to be divided by what has happened in 1884-85, which was not our design,
yeah.
You understand? Which is the partition of Africa and the likes. And so we must move beyond seeing ourselves as nationals of different states to seeing ourselves as just Africa, and this is just all we have. And then consciously, that's where to go. That's how to stop xenophobia, right? And and with that we can work together and make people accountable. There's no accountability of leadership in Africa, right? And that's why these things are propagated and the like. So we need to make people accountable, and we must do it together, seeing ourselves as one Africa.
All right, we need to make people accountable, and we must do it together, seeing ourselves as Africa. We really wish time will permit us to discuss further with you, Dr. Jose Albert. Anyway, we thank you sincerely for your views on the program. Thank you so much, and we hope you be our guest again next time on the program.
Thank you very much. It's great being here.
And to our viewers, join us again on another episode of Diplomatic Ties. And on behalf of the production crew, we say goodbye for now. I am Comfort Fashion.
Welcome. This is Bon Appetit, a culinary